quick introduction about ProductTank. So ProductTank started like 10 years ago now in London, and mainly, product manager was feeling a bit lonely and wanted to share ideas and speak with other PMs, and so he started to have meetups. And now we are in more than 200 cities in the world and more than 150,000 members. So that's quite a journey, and that's great to see where product management has gone. And ProductTank, what is it? It's a meetup from product managers for product managers. We usually have in Barcelona between 1 and 3 speakers. Usually, so not really tonight. We can have conversations on the comments section, but usually it's also a networking event, and we spent quite some time after the presentation speaking. We really recommend you and encourage you to have a look at ProductTank and the Mind the Product community. So there is the website. We have a newsletter. Some jobs are offered there, and also trainings. And there is also a Slack channel. So due to the situation right now with coronavirus, it's not really clear. What will be the situation with the next face-to-face events? But here you have an overview, and you can go to the website and have a look at the events of Mind the Products and Mind the Products Engage that are going to happen later this year. And we really recommend you to contribute as much as you can. So if you have any ideas of topics, or if you want to speak, or if you want to sponsor an event or host it, just contact us, and we'll be very happy to discuss it with you. So I will let Gino introduce the topics of tonight.
Thank you, Loic. Hi, this is Gino. I'm very excited to be here introducing this topic. I'm very personally interested in this one, being already over 40s. So the topic of tonight is often overlooked. How do we keep up as a professional in the product management world? How do we make sure that we are future-proofing our career? How do we look at our career as the product, ourselves as the product, and we use product thinking to make our career progressing in this uncertainty world, especially in this moment where everything is changing around us? And the person that's going to talk about this is a longtime friend of ProductTank Barcelona, Jeff Gothelf, author of Lean UX, Sensor Respond, and ultimately the new book that is coming in 2 months. I'm very eager to buy it as soon as it's out. He's going to introduce this topic to us in the next 25 minutes, and then we will have time for Q&A later on. Small trivia. This is the 3rd time that we have Jeff with us in ProductTank Barcelona. He's been already at least 3 times speaker of our main stage conferences in respectively 2016 London, 2017 San Francisco, and 2019 Singapore. So I'm very excited to introduce Jeff, and thank you guys. Enjoy the meetup.
Awesome. Thanks, Gino. I just got home from that around the world trip. It took me 4 years. I left in 2016. I did London, went to San Francisco and Singapore, came home. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you. And thanks so much for joining me today. I'm going to give a short presentation on the topics in this new book, Forever Employable. I will point out one quick thing. I just got the first copy ever of the book right here. You can see it says not for resale. It's just the proof to see it, but you can see it's not a big book. It's about 100 pages. And I'm super excited to actually hold it in my hand. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And so let me start my presentation. I'm going to assume you can see my slides at this point, which I think you can. So let's talk about what this is about. And really, the book is about it's semi-autobiographical, which means it's about me. At least the storyline in there is about me, but it's not my whole life. It's not like I started at the beginning. I start the story when I turned 35. I turned 35. I was living in New York. I was married, still married to the same person. Two cute little kids. I still have the cute kids. They're just not little anymore. They're teenage girls. And I kind of had it all. I had a house, I had a couple of cars. It was the American dream. I had a good job in New York City. And I was looking forward to, kind of continuing my climb up the ladder. And then I had this kind of terrifying moment on the morning of my 35th birthday. On the morning of my 35th birthday, I woke up in a cold sweat. I just had this panicked attack. And the feeling that I had was this. The panic was, in 5 years, when I turned 40, I was going to be overpaid and unemployable, right? I was going to be too expensive, and I wasn't going to have enough skills to continue to maintain the kind of income and career progression and lifestyle that my family depended on and that I depended on. I was really worried about this at 35. I thought I had 5 good years left, because that's what I had seen from some other designers and product managers that I'd been working with. And look, up until that point, I had a pretty good run. I'd been pretty successful at that. Actually, I started off as a broke musician. I played in bands for many years in the 1990s, not making a lot of money. And then the internet came around. The internet, how cool was the internet in the 90s? And it turns out that in the late 90s, if you could spell HTML, you could get a job. And I was tired of being a broke musician and not going anywhere. And so I got a job. I got a job doing graphic design and front-end development, otherwise known as HTML, at a company called IXL, which was one of the big web consulting firms in the 90s. Shortly thereafter, I discovered this amazing book, Books Change Lives. And I'm going to show you how that happens to me throughout my career here. This book called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. And that put me on a path to become an information architect and a UX designer, and then ultimately a product manager and so forth. Except those paths get disrupted along the way, right? For me, the big disruption, the first big disruption was the dot-com bubble. Completely bursts, everything goes away, all the jobs go away, and I'm bouncing around for a while, looking for work, trying to stay employed as a UX designer. I land a job at AOL. I worked at America Online for a little while. I ended up managing a design team at Web Trends. And then as things were starting to kind of calm down, I find myself back in New York managing a product design team and a product management team, a product development team at a company called The Ladders. Now, this is 10 years into my career. And 10 years into my career, I'd clawed my way up to the middle, right? Like I made it to the middle, which is, somewhere, it's a good place to be, but it's not that safe of a place. And I wake up on my 35th birthday, and I've got this crazy realization, or this epiphany, that I'm going to be unemployable and broke again in 5 years. Because look, all of these young people were coming into the market. Many younger, hungrier designers were coming up. They were better than me. They were faster than me. They knew different tools than I knew. And most importantly, they were cheaper than me, right? And so all of a sudden, I'm feeling very replaceable, very vulnerable, and I didn't know what to do. And so on the morning of my 35th birthday, I made a resolution. I made a decision on that morning that changed everything for me, really, in how I approach my career, my work life, and sort of ensuring that I always have a job. And that decision was this: I was no longer going to look for jobs, right? I was going to stop doing it. And instead, jobs were going to look for me, right? That was my epiphanous moment there, the moment that changed everything, right? And and I bet you're saying, "Wow, that blows my mind," right? Like that sounds great and all, but how the hell are you going to do that? It sounds like a fairly mind-blowing thing, but the reality is that there are a lot of unanswered questions once you make this declaration. I'm no longer going to look for jobs. Jobs are going to find me. For example, does anyone know who I am? Right? If jobs are going to find me, people should know who I am. Do they know who I am? The year is 2008. Not really, right? Why would they look for me? Right? What problem do they have that I could help them solve? How would they find me? Right? Would they, like, in other words, how will they know to look for me, and where am I going? What are my what's my presence going to be? Right? And then ultimately, what kind of work do I want to do? Right? So if jobs are going to find me, I want product management jobs. I want tech jobs. I want design jobs. I don't want bartender jobs. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not that's not the kind of work that I wanted to do. Right? And you start to answer these questions. And really, I spent the next 10 plus years building a platform to answer these questions, and that would allow this resolution to be realized. And what I've learned in the last 10 plus years is that, in my opinion, there are at least 5 qualities that you need to future-proof your career and become forever employable. And I think that based on the experience that I have, there are 5 steps that you can take explicitly, and I'll go through each one here shortly, to becoming forever employable. And when you add these things up together, right, as product people, it really comes down to this. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't do or realize. You've got to treat your career, and you have to treat your professional development as a product. The same way that you think about the stuff you're making at work every day, you've got to think about your job, your career progression, what you want in the future, the problems that you're solving, the value that you create, right? And start to think about that. So let's break each one of these things down very quickly, and then I'll take your questions, right? So if we talk about 5 qualities to becoming forever unemployable, these are the 5 qualities, right? Entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, continuous learning, improvement, and reinvention. And this probably sounds familiar to you, right? This is agile, or at the very least, it's agility. But instead of focusing on digital products and services, you're focusing on you, your career, and your professional development and growth, right? So let's just kind of break down each one of these. What's interesting is that as you look at each one of these, you might say, well, I don't have that quality, or I don't have that experience. I challenge you to think through what you've done to date to see if that's really true. For example, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I never thought of myself. I was always an execution guy, sure, but the ideas, the vision guy, no. But this wasn't my value proposition, right? But I actually played in bands for a long time. And bands are startups. I realized this far too late in life. You've got a bunch of guys with a crazy idea trying to convince the world to buy their idea. And you keep trying to iterate and offer different ways of doing it, but you're trying to build that following. Being in bands was entrepreneurial, and you can leverage that past experience to move forward, right? To understand how to apply that thinking to your career. Self-confidence, right? Self-confidence is tough if you don't have it. The thing that's really interesting is that this is the tough part, your experience has value, right? Your knowledge has value, and you have something valuable to add to the conversation because no one has your story. And so the idea is, if you start to take leaps of faith, small leaps of faith, you start to build that confidence. My confidence started immediately after university. I was just a kid, really, but I joined the circus immediately after leaving university, right? And it felt like a crazy thing to do. It felt like a dumb thing to do. I didn't really understand what I would learn from that, but it was a unique opportunity that kind of fell in my lap. And so I spent 6 months on the road with the circus, and I lived there. And what I learned from that, I learned a lot of things from that, and I've got stories for days about it. But what I learned was that every new opportunity is a chance to learn something. So why not take it? And kind of built my confidence up to take bigger and bigger risks over time. The interesting thing about these risks is that they teach you stuff. You're always learning, you're always getting better. And as we think about how we progress as product managers, right, this is one of the qualities as we start to think about how to build a bigger platform for ourselves, how to get people to start to know who you are. It's about reading their work. It's about speaking with others. It's about engaging in community like we're doing right now. It's about experimenting with new ideas on Twitter or on your blog or on Medium. And the feedback loop starts to build that learning. And it's the only way to progress as a product manager, in the same way that's the only way to progress with your product, right? You can't be stagnant or you'll be out of business soon. The interesting thing is that the learnings that you pick will drive new ways of doing things. And it's that ability to consider how can you always get better at your craft that starts to future-proof your career, right? It's this phrase that I love that I learned from a TED Talk by Astro Teller, where he talks about enthusiastic skepticism, right? You're always enthusiastic about getting better. One of the things that I do to continuously improve what I'm doing is to find people to collaborate with, to teach with. In fact, one of the people I teach with on a regular basis every year is Jeff Patton. We teach together because we teach each other. We learn from each other. We learn ideas. We learn better ways of teaching. We learn better ways of collaborating, and we're continuously improving, right? So I've got that quality in there as well. And I think that ultimately it's thinking about how you can progress your thinking and reinvent for the next reality, right? So what got you here to your current level of success likely won't get you to the next big level of your success, at least not your technical skills, right? There's just too much change. And so as the world changes and as your career progresses, how do you take the skills that you have and apply them in new ways and new thinking, right? So one of the things I've done recently, I published this article this week on Harvard Business Review on their blog, which is how do you take product thinking and apply it to non-product teams like HR and finance and legal, right? Because for me, that's really interesting, and that's where I'd like to go. We're having this conversation tonight because I'm reinventing the material that I've been teaching for a long time, but applying it to your career and your professional development. So those are the 5 qualities that I think are required to future-proof your career and to start building that recognized expert platform. And the steps that I took to get there, and I will share with you some of my experience, are these. And this is really kind of the breakdown. The 5 chapters in the book are these 5 chapters. We talk about planting a flag and then telling your story, following the new path, teaching, and giving it all away. Let's go through each one of these, and I'll kind of explain this. So step 1 in creating this platform towards forever employability, towards future-proofing your career, is planting a flag, right? And what I mean by that is that you choose where you're going to be an expert, right? What am I passionate about? What's my expertise in? What's my experience in? What are some recent trends that I might be able to leverage to plant my flag and kind of own this area of this content area? And if you get good at this and you choose something meaningful and you're consistent about it, you start to become synonymous with that thing. Let me show you some examples, right? So if we were in a big room, I'd say kind of what's Eric Ries's flag? But you know what Eric Ries's flag is. It's lean startup, right? I say the name Jake Knapp. What's Jake's flag, right? Jake's flag is design sprints, right? That's what he did. Our fearless guru, Marty Kagan, right? Marty Kagan's world is product management, right? That's where he planted his flag. And for me, it was lean UX and agile. That was my flag, and that's what I was working on and solving and where my experience was. And I recognized that there was a big challenge with this across the world, not just on my team, but on many other teams along the way. And so that's where I planted my flag. Once you've identified your area of expertise, you got to tell your story. And really what I've learned over the years is that telling your story, becoming a good storyteller, is key to your success as a product manager, as a designer, as a knowledge worker, really, to be able to tell your story to anyone, to anywhere, all the time. And I can show you how this evolved over time, right? 2.5 years after my 35th birthday, 2.5 years, right? So I have this terrifying epiphany on the morning of my 35th birthday. 2.5 years later, I give my first talk on how to solve Agile and UX problems, right? And I submitted it, and it took me a while to do this because I needed to build up that expertise and that experience to be able to share something of value to my audience. A month later, I gave the first Lean UX talk in Paris, right? It was called Lean IA, Lean Information Architecture. But again, I submitted my talk, they accepted me, and that moved forward. And really, this begins to evolve as I'm telling my story at every opportunity. And then kind of the big breakthrough came on in March of 2011 when I got the first Lean UX piece published in Smashing Magazine. At the time, they had 1 million readers, and the conversation goes global. To be clear, this is 3 years after my 35th birthday, right? This is taking time. That leads to a bunch of talks about Lean UX in various places. It leads to conversations on Twitter, on Medium, on LinkedIn, a lot of places, right? Quora at the time, less so today, less so on Facebook, email newsletters, but really using all the channels to have the conversations. And then, I probably, we stopped before we made Lean UX the musical, but I suppose we could have done that had we wanted to, but we decided to pause. But the question is, as you're telling your story, right, why did my story resonate, and how do you create a story that resonates with your target audience, right? Well, my story resonated because it solved a real problem many people had, right? So just like your product succeeds, your story succeeds when you're solving a real problem for a real customer or a real person in a meaningful way. I had actual experience solving the problem, so I could share what we did, and I was humble about it. I wasn't out there saying things like, this is the way we did it. It's awesome. It's always worked. It's perfect. It'll work for you. No, I said, we tried this and it sucked. We tried this and it didn't really work, but we learned something, and then we tried this other thing and that really worked. And that builds that authentic connection with your audience. My stories are always practical. They're always tactical. You might be noticing that as I'm telling you this story tonight, I'm giving you lots of practical advice to move that forward. And that helps build, I was going to sneeze. Excuse me. That helps build that, excuse me, that authentic connection with your target audience, right? So you're telling your story. Now, here's the interesting thing, and this is the real challenge here. As you start to tell your story about what you're good at, what you're known for, where your expertise is, new opportunities will arise. The path that you're currently on will start to split, and you're going to have to choose where to go. The interesting thing here for me is that as the Lean UX conversation was scaling up, I was doing less and less design work. Right? People were asking me to come teach and talk about Lean UX. They were not asking me to do user experience and design work. And this was terrifying for me because, remember, I was already afraid when I turned 35, I was already afraid that my design skills weren't good enough. And now 3 years later, I'm doing less and less design work. My skills are only getting worse because I'm being asked to do this different thing, right? I'm being asked to travel around the world and speak at conferences and do all these things, right? And I didn't know what to do, right? But again, new paths emerge, new opportunities emerge. I'm speaking at all these conferences. And all of a sudden, I find out that book publishers go to conferences to find the latest speakers, on the latest topics. And Lean UX was an up-and-coming topic. I was doing a lot of public speaking on it. I got offered a book deal. And again, going back to those qualities, entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, I said, why not? And I jumped in and I signed a book contract. Except there was one major problem to signing that book contract is I didn't know how to write a book, which was, I figured I'll figure it out at some point. And again, this is one of those things, right? As these new paths emerge, you should be prepared to meet that opportunity. So yes, I was lucky to get a book deal or a book deal presented to me, but I was prepared to seize that opportunity. And that's really, really important. Now, that's going to happen in a variety of different situations. For me, I took the opportunity and I failed at it 3 times. It took me 2 years, 3 editors, and 4 full manuscripts to finish Lean UX. I wrote that book 4 times in 2 years. The first 3 times were terrible. Each time was less terrible than the last. And the 4th one, O'Reilly finally said they would publish. I didn't know how many chances they were going to give me, but it finally published. The nice thing about that is that it provided a really nice opportunity for me while people were waiting for the book. It gave me a chance to talk about the material and to learn how to teach it until finally, 5 years after my 35th birthday, Lean UX comes out. And Lean UX changes everything for me personally. When that book came out, because I'd spent so much time building up anticipation for it, right? All of a sudden the conversation goes global, and I can start to really sustain myself on teaching, consulting, coaching, and speaking about Lean UX, which leads me to step number 4, which is teaching. One of the most delightful realizations I've made about myself in the last couple of years is that I've become a teacher. I never realized that, and that I'm good at it. And that's something, had you had asked me 10 years ago, you think you're a teacher? No. You think you're good at it? Absolutely not. But teaching is how you tell your story. It's how you get better at the expertise that you have, and you start to have real impact on people. And there's all kinds of opportunities for you to teach, right? And this is just a small sample. I do all of this stuff. I say yes to everything: workshops and conferences and webinars, podcasts, etc. Because every time you teach, you get feedback on the material, right? That's your learning loop. You're putting something out into the market, you get feedback, right? You learn how to improve your storytelling. You understand where your material is resonating, where it could use updating, where there are new content opportunities, right? And it's a terrific way to get better at this. Now, I'm not going to go through all those things, but I'll do a quick deep dive into workshops, because I do a lot of workshops, and I find that they're a great way to exercise your ideas, right? How do I get these ideas into people's heads? How do I teach them what I know and my expertise? I get better at telling my stories. I get better at telling my jokes too, which is really important to me. I'd like to believe that maybe someday I could be a stand-up comic. Workshops make money. That's a really nice perk. You can actually make a living selling workshops. And the other really nice part of workshops is they generate leads for your other businesses, your coaching business, in-house teaching business, speaking gigs, that type of thing. And so they create all these new opportunities. The more you teach, the more cyclical, the more you get back from that feedback, you can improve your delivery, your content, your expertise, and your platform. The last step, and then I'll wrap this up, and then we can do some Q&A about this or anything else that you want to talk about, is step 5. This was my biggest realization about how to manage the platform that I was building for myself to ensure that I was becoming forever employable and future-proofing my career. And that's giving it all away, like giving everything away for free as much as I can, right? So making all of my work and myself easily findable. Remember that first question: how will people find me? Does anyone know who I am? Put your stuff out there, engage in the conversation, make it free, make it easily findable, make it accessible, right? Post your articles, your webinars, your podcasts, your blog posts. Post them on easily findable sites. If you want to use sites like Medium, that's terrific. I personally prefer, at this point in my career, to have everything under my brand. And so I put everything under my website. So if you go to jeffgothelf.com, everything's there. Videos of my talks. People still hire me to give those talks. Blog posts. People still want to engage and have me teach the material in the blog posts. Everything I give back to the community comes back with those jobs ultimately finding me. And so we give it all away. Building your community locally. The stuff that we're doing right now is so key and so important, right? It gives you an opportunity to meet your colleagues in your location, online. Meetups are a great place to exercise your material. It helps you build friends and contacts in other organizations. And it's a really great place to start to understand kind of how your content is going to resonate in the marketplace. As I wrap this up and take your questions, there's a few things I want you to remember, okay? If you want to stay relevant in product management, if you want to start to build this platform and become a consistent part of the broader conversation, either locally or globally, you have to stay active. You have to stay active in public conversations. You have to have a presence at events or meetups. You have to contribute productively, constructively to conversations and participate. It's really key. As you're thinking about your platform and as you're seeing shifts in the marketplace, or you're thinking about, well, maybe I'll start with product management as a whole, but I want to specialize in product management for Internet of Things, for example. Start thinking about your next thing at least 2 years before you'll need it. For example, there's a lot of agile stuff I'd like to do with the HR community, the human resources community. I'm now starting to gain presence and activity in that community. I started that conversation actually 2.5 years ago. And I've been building it more and more and more to gain credibility, to have presence, and to ultimately be able to participate knowledgeably in that particular space. The next thing I want you to remember is this. This is my path. It worked for me, so I'm sharing it with you. There are lots and lots of other options, right? So take what you can from my path, apply it, experiment, learn, come back, and then scale it up based on what you're actually learning. And then ultimately, as you think about this stuff, I always like to think about, I love this quote from Bezos, and I love the way that he thinks about business. He says, people always ask him, what's going to be different in 5 years? And he doesn't think about it that way. He thinks about it this way. He goes, what's going to be the same in 5 years? What's not going to change in 10 years or 20 years, right? And if you know what's not going to change in that time frame, you can create a platform that always speaks to that, a service, a value proposition to your target audience that speaks to that, right? People will always need to communicate. They will always need to eat. They will always need healthcare. They will always need to socialize despite pandemics, right? How do you position yourself in a way that meets these sort of forever needs of the people that you work with and that you serve, right? So just some stuff to think about today. That's the content of the book. You can pre-order the Kindle on Amazon right now. And there's lots of info at foreveremployable.com, which is a link to my website there. And then this does this transition all by itself over here to senseandrespondpress.com, which is another one of my side businesses. But anyway, I just want to say thanks. You can always email me if you don't get your question answered tonight. And with that, I'm just going to drop out of sharing mode, and I'd love to take your questions about this topic, or really any topic you'd like to talk about. If you'd like to talk about Lean UX, Sense and Respond, Agile, product management, you name it, go. What do you guys want to talk about?
I'm the one asking the questions on behalf of the people on YouTube. Do you want to quickly talk about the blends with your books as kind of a giveaway for the people asking on YouTube? If that's still
how to give them away? Oh yeah, you know what? I have a link to a form here, and it's right here, and I don't know how to share. I don't know how to add a comment because I'm not logged in. But I'll figure out how to share it with you in just a second. But yes, so I've got a form that I'm going to ask you to fill out, if that's okay. Maybe I can do it here. Here we go. Yeah, there. I shared it with you, so hopefully you can share it with the folks. And so if you fill out that form, I'm going to give away 2 signed copies of Forever Employable as soon as it's ready for press. It might take a month or a month and a half to get it to you. But if you fill out that form, we'll choose two random people from that list to give the book to. So please feel free to share that form. That's the form right there. Cool. All right. So questions.
Cool. Yeah, we do have some questions. There is actually 2 that are quite close to each other, so I would combine them. Noe is asking, I love the blend of flag concept. What would be your recommendation to find your personal flag? And then, which goes quite with that question as well, is Ocean asks, there's a lot of talk about generalists versus specialists in tech. How would you advise someone who's a generalist in finding their personal flag?
Yeah, great question, right? So a couple things to think about here. When I think about planting the flag, you have to think about your current expertise, your experience, and your passions. And I wouldn't necessarily limit it to professional expertise and experience either. Like, for example, I'm a piano player. You saw that, right? I know a lot about vintage electric pianos. Okay, just happen to know a lot about that. I thought about that as a potential flag, right? Can I become sort of a recognized expert on vintage electric pianos, right? I felt like the market size for that was pretty small. So I think the first thing you have to think about is your expertise, your experience, and your passion, especially both professional and personal. The next thing I would look at is current trends, right? So what are technological trends? What are consumer trends? What are career trends? What are geopolitical trends? What's kind of happening in the world that you feel like might be impacted by your experience or your expertise? And I think that's really important as well. And then I think finally, one thing to consider as well is to do a little bit of product management work around sort of market sizing, right? So I thought about becoming a recognized expert in vintage electric pianos. And believe me, there is a diehard, devoted community for that, but it's a really small group of folks, really, really super nerdy. And, for me, it wasn't a big enough target audience. And so really starting to think about, like, is kind of market sizing, competitive analysis, that kind of thing, and then trying to balance those three parts and picking a flag. Now, look, once you pick it, first of all, you're not married to it forever. That's number one. You can always change it in the future. But more importantly, you can sense and respond your way to validating that hypothesis, right? So you're going to put a hypothesis together that says, I believe I should make YouTube videos about, I don't know, vintage electric pianos, right? Cool, right? Run an experiment. Start to see if you can attract people to that video, right? Before you double down and invest too heavily, start to see if you can generate the kind of interest in your content that you'd hoped for. Now, give yourself a reasonable time frame and try a variety of different experiments. But but that's the way to get started. And then if you find that kind of product market fit, then you begin to scale it, right? I'll make more videos. Maybe I'll write some written content. Maybe I'll do some live webinars, that type of thing. So that's how I would start.
Cool, super interesting. And that fits also well to our next question from Nacho, because he wants to have an answer to, have you done any problem validation before writing Lean UX to know that it would solve a real problem? So fits kind of to the same discussion that you do some validation first, and then based on that, you come up with a flag or with a book.
Absolutely. The answer to your question is yes, absolutely. But I'll answer it a bit more deeply than that. I was faced with the problem of solving Agile in UX. As the leader of my design team at the Ladders, that was my biggest challenge, because the organization was shifting from waterfall to Agile, and I just showed up and I had to build a team. So I had to build a team that knew how to do UX in Agile world. For me, no one knew how to do that in 2008. People had ideas, but they weren't great ideas. I learned how to do it along with my team and other experts to the point where we had solved it. As we were working through it, I was writing about it publicly, blog posts, 500 words, 600 words, 700 words. The reaction to those blog posts was overwhelming. That was the market validation. I was tweeting about this stuff. This is before Twitter was a disaster, when you can actually have a nice professional conversation on Twitter, and it was fun. We had really nice, professional, fun conversations about this on Twitter. There was clearly an audience hungry for this content. That first talk that I showed you about, that kind of my next level of investment in Lean UX, when I talked about beyond staggered sprints, that was at the Agile conference, the annual Agile conference in 2010, so 10 years ago. And that was on the UX track, I think, maybe in the product track. And the room was packed. Right? For a track that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, usually at that conference, that room was full. The same thing happened at South by Southwest, right? So like, yes, every one of those things was an experiment, and the feedback was positive. And so I invested a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And when the opportunity came to write the book, I knew there was a market for the book. I knew there was an audience for the book. I just had to figure out how to write one, which was the next challenge. So yeah.
Which brings us perfectly to the next question. Lena wants to know, what kind of self-promotion techniques do you recommend to people when they're neither a good speaker or a good writer? Like, you could still be a good designer or product manager, but what else do you see?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple thoughts on this. First, no one is born a great writer, and no one is born a great speaker. Right off the bat. It comes with practice, right? That's it. We wrote Lean UX. I wrote it 3 times, and then Josh and I wrote it a 4th time. We submitted the first manuscript in December of 2012. In 2016, we wrote Lean UX 2nd edition, which meant I had to go back and read Lean UX 1st edition for the first time in probably 2 years. I was mortified. I was so disgusted by the writing. I was embarrassed by the writing because I had become such a better writer in those, so from 2012 to 2016, simply by writing all the time. This year, we are going to write Lean UX 3rd edition, which means I have to go back and read Lean UX 2nd edition, which it's been a while since I've read it. I'm terrified of reading it, right? So first of all, practice makes perfect. Public speaking is a skill that you can learn. It's a fear that you can get over. I played in bands for years, and so being on stage in front of people was second nature when I started doing this, but it wasn't at first, right, when I was playing music. So you can practice and do that. But I just want to get that out of the way and say, nobody's born a great writer or a great speaker. And you can practice and you get better. You do. It's like exercising a muscle. That said, what other techniques can you use to build a platform? So first of all, you can make videos, right? Videos are great. People love videos, short videos, very popular today. You've got all the equipment already in your house right now. You don't need it. You've got a phone, or a webcam. You've got a laptop. So that's one way to do it. You can participate in conversations online, right? So you're not a great writer, okay? You're not going to write 1,000 words, but you can participate in your community online, whether it's in Slack groups like the Mind the Product Slack group, or on Twitter, right? You can build your expertise. You can build community. That's another way to raise your profile, right? So again, I'll use Mind the Product as an example, right? Martin Erickson became well known because he built community, right? He built Mind the Product, right? And then he started giving talks and he started doing more work, right? But he treated it as a product and built it. And so any kind of participation in the domain, in the industry, goes a long way to do that. And there's lots of other, like especially at meetups, you can lead a meetup session that doesn't have to be a talk, for example, right? There's fish bowls, there's breakout sessions, there's little workshops. There's a variety of things that you can do to get your ideas out there in front of people and start to get some feedback.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty big time investment as well to build your own brand and come up with the flag. So we have one question from Kev. Between balancing a full-time job, family, and staying healthy, what sort of time commitment would you recommend is needed for this type of career development?
Oh man, that's a really good question. And all those things are super important. I'm trying to think of, I don't know how to quantify this. I'll just tell you what I did. I'll just do experience sharing as opposed to saying 12 minutes a day. That's the answer. Look, for me, especially when the kids were little, it was nights, occasional weekends, like before everybody woke up, Primarily for me, it was on my commute. So when I was living in New Jersey, I had a 45-minute commute each way to New York City and back. That was prime time for writing, for tweeting, for that kind of stuff. Today, because this is my full-time job, I spent a significant amount of time on it. But when I was employed full-time, I just kind of snuck in minutes here and there whenever I had a free moment. And really, in hindsight, one of the things I wish I would have done better is just been more explicit. There's another word I'm looking for. Intentional. That's the word I'm looking for. But more intentional about what I'm doing and when I'm doing it, and then being more intentional about when I'm going to stop doing it, and kind of focus back on family and staying healthy, and then ultimately my full-time job, because I was less intentional, and I think I could have managed that better in the first sort of 10 years or so of doing this.
Cool. Super interesting. There are a lot of people quite interested in the writing process itself. So we have one question from Pat that combines several questions quite well. Maybe talk a little bit about your book writing process in more detail, and then how long did it take you to write Forever Employable? Like, maybe run through that a bit.
Great question, because there's actually I've written 4 books, which is bananas. I can't believe that I'm even saying that out loud. I mean, getting that first one, I told you, Lean UX out, was so hard. I was like, I'm never going to do this again, ever. And I just wrote the 4th one. And everyone was different. So let me tell you the process very, very quickly for each one. Lean UX was easy from a content perspective, because I was writing what I knew. I was writing my work. That's what I was writing about. And so the writing process was super messy for the first 3 iterations, obviously, because they failed. I just kind of, I didn't know what I was doing. And so I just wrote words, and then I gave it to O'Reilly and they pooped on it. It's when I brought Josh Seiden, my co-author, on, that I really started to get a bit more structure about my writing process, because Josh was a writer. He was an English major, and he had actually written long form stuff before. And so he and I had been working together and teaching this material together. And he said, look, we're going to break this down in the same way that we teach it, the same way that we tell the stories to people live. That's how we're going to tell the stories in the written word. And we broke down the content into a table of contents. So table of contents, super important, right? And if you're writing from what you know, right, write down the same way that you tell the story to people live is the same way that you can start to write that story. So table of contents. And that's what we did. And that worked really well, because we already had the story coming out of our workshops. If you're doing any kind of training, any kind of facilitation, any kind of leadership of events, or with your colleagues, with your teams, with your executives, that's a great way to structure the writing process. And for us, and at that point, it was Google Docs, to be very clear, just about tools. We divided the chapters per person, and then we wrote drafts in Google Docs, and we swapped. Like, I edited his, he edited mine, and then we did a pass for tone and voice. Sense and Respond was different, because we had to do a ton of research for Sense and Respond, because it was a business book, and we were not business book authors. And so we did a lot of primary and secondary research, and we collected everything in Evernote. And we had notebooks in Evernote for every topic. Again, we had a proposal with a table of contents, and we had folders for every item in the table of contents. We used a tool called Scrivener for Sense and Respond. Scrivener is kind of like Trello for authors. So you kind of have cards that you can move around a board and reorganize the book, and then it spits out a manuscript when you're done. Josh liked it. I hated it. We never used it again. Trello's fine. Like, I don't need a tool for that. Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking was 6,000 words. I wrote it over the weekend. It was an expansion of 1,000 words I'd published on Medium. And so that one, I don't know, that was just 6,000 words was a, kind of a half-day writing session. But I was pretty good at writing at that point. I was getting better at writing. But I'll tell you, Forever Employable. Forever Employable was the easiest book I've ever written. And it's easy because I did it fundamentally differently than every other book. And I'll be completely transparent with you. I wrote a presentation detailing the storyline first. So I made a PowerPoint. The slides you saw today were some of the slides were taken out of that. So I told the story in a keynote deck, and then I decided to hire a ghostwriter for the book. A ghostwriter is someone who works with you to help you get the actual writing done for the book. And the way that it worked was this. He would interview me on a video call like this, and he would record the call. And he would take the audio track and send it out to be transcribed. He would take the transcription, and my words coming out of that transcription for each chapter became the base of that chapter. And then he would go through it and make it into actual, like, legible writing, not stream of consciousness speaking. And then he would give it to me, and I would edit, and I would write, and I would change it. And we went through that process for the whole book over that. And together, we finished the book in 6 months. The fastest, and what I believe to be the best written book of all the books that I've written so far. And the best part of this, the thing that I'm most proud of in this particular book, and I find totally interesting, is that if you read Lean UX and you read Sense and Respond, I believe that my personality is missing from those books. Partially because I had a co-author, and you kind of have to mash those voices together. And partially when I write, it gets it gets professional. There's not a whole lot of humor or sarcasm. But because the base material for Forever Employable was me talking like this, my personality comes out of the book. And it was really weird for me to read the manuscript as I was going through it at first. I was like, this sounds like me. For the first time in 4 books, it actually sounds like me writing it. And so I'm super proud of that. And I think when you read it, you'll see that after listening to me talk now for 50 minutes, the book really sounds like me talking like this. And I really like that. I think that makes a big difference.
Well, thanks for being so honest and transparent. That's really insightful. We have one question from Sergio, which is a bit of a different one, but it fits really good in the current situation. How can you prepare yourself for times like these, like COVID-19 situations, where you're not allowed to go to companies or do like public speeches? Like, how do you make sure that you are still flexible enough to pivot in such mid or long-term situations?
So this is a great question. I'm really glad we're talking about this, because this is exactly the situation that you're preparing for when you kind of like start to think about this, right? This is exactly the situation you're preparing for, right? I'm going to answer it generically first, and then I'll answer it specifically. So indulge me for 2 seconds. I wrote this book with a reader persona in mind. And that reader persona is a mid-career knowledge worker who has worked their way up the corporate ladder, but that every time that there's any kind of a shift or an event, an economic event, something at the company, layoffs, new manager, a pandemic, whatever, geopolitical shifts, whatever it is, they panic and they get their CV ready and they start looking for work and all that kind of stuff. And my goal was to ensure that that person, that reader persona, never has to panic again, right? And so the material in the book is designed to create a situation where if there is even an unprecedented thing that none of us have ever experienced before or could have predicted, right? This pandemic and these quarantines and these lockdowns, you're in a position to maintain as much momentum as possible, right? So in today's world, look, again, I'll just do experience sharing. I have a big client a big telecom client. Okay, they're in a different country. Their country is locked down at the moment, just like we are here in Spain. 10,000 employees became a 10,000 person distributed team overnight. Right? They're an in-person culture, right? Chaos. Okay, I'm there with my team. I've got a team of folks that we're working with. It's not my team. I'm on this team, and we're delivering value. We're delivering on product management and OKRs and the kind of stuff that we do. Product strategy, and then all of a sudden, overnight, 10,000 people are working distributed. Well, guess what? We have a platform where we've worked like this for a long time. We're pretty good at distributed work. And so we immediately pivoted our content offering to fit what the client needed, right? So yeah, they still need the product strategy stuff and the OKRs and all that stuff, right? And the agility and the agile stuff. But right now, they need to get really good at remote collaboration and just sort of like distributed working basic etiquette. And so we're helping with that as well. And so in the reality that we're facing today, right? The tools. I don't have to teach you the tools, Zoom and Mural and whatever, StreamYard and so forth, right? It's more about how do you take what you're already good at and provide that value in this new channel, in this new reality, in this new medium, right? And you're seeing that happen, right? Everybody went online, and because everybody's panicking right now. And I love what I'm seeing in some of these businesses. So travel businesses are getting crushed. They're trying to bring online experiences online, which is interesting, and they're running experiments. Education, right? Schools just went virtual for the first time and had no expectation to do so. Their teachers have never taught this way, not really, right? All of a sudden, they're forced to work this way. So they're trying stuff. So my advice is try something. The first week of virtual school for my kids was not great. The second week was better. The third week was better. We're in week 5 now. Week 5. Everyone's got a rhythm. Things are working pretty well. The tools, they've solidified on some tools. Like things are getting, better. And so my advice to you is you can't meet in person. Okay. So what can you do? And how can you deliver value in this way? Try something, right? See how it resonates. It's not going to be awesome necessarily, right? But you'll learn something, and the next attempt will be better. And kind of, look and see what other people are doing. There's I'm working with a group of folks to try to put on an online event. Okay, everyone's got online events right now. Okay, what are we going to do that's different? What are people doing right now? Right? What are they charging? Like, there's lots of product management work you can do to inform your first experiment in that space. And so I encourage you to take your core skills as a product manager and apply them to this business problem that you're now facing, because it works.
Cool. I think we could go on for hours with questions. I would have one last one from Janice, which is, what methods or techniques do you use to improve your storytelling? Like listening to your presentation today, there was a lot of storytelling as well. That's the question. And the addition would be, do you think having a personal creative hobby help someone to improve the storytelling or teaching skills?
So I'll answer the second question first. The answer is yes. I think if there's any kind of creative work is storytelling, whether it's art, painting, poetry, music, sculpting, whatever it is, right? Dance, that's storytelling. So I think that's super helpful. My medium is public speaking and teaching. And so I look for great examples of public speaking and teaching and creative storytelling in business context mostly. So for example, TED Talks. TED Talks are super interesting. When there are speakers at events who I respect, I go see them talk. Even if I don't care about what they're saying, I'm there for the masterclass in public speaking. That's interesting to me. if there's someone who's been doing something for a while and they're getting a lot of praise for it, I'll go check out their video. I'll attend their class, right? Anything to pick up some of the skills. There's a lot of great books, in fact, when it comes to teaching, right? Especially teaching, because storytelling, teaching, it's kind of all part and parcel of the same thing. There's 1,000 years of teaching experience in humanity, right? And storytelling, right? And so read a book on storytelling. I love all the material that comes out of the folks at Pixar, for example. They tell great stories. Like all the TED Talks by Pixar speakers, I watch all of them, right? Because they're great, right? And so that's my inspiration for a lot of that stuff.
Wow, super. Thank you very much for answering all these questions. I think we're bringing now back Guido, Gino, and Loic. They're still here. Hi. And I'll give over to Gino, I think.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Jeff, for the amazing content. I think we had so many, personally also, so many food for thoughts. And I think we will always all think about this in the next few days. I think many of us will look taller in our video calls tomorrow, just by being reinforced by your words and how to build our own presence. Said so, I want to also thank you, all the community. Thanks the community from Alex, Loic, Guido, and me, because being product people, we always check our numbers, and I'm very, very happy to say that we had a very exceptional presence live tonight, even though we had no beers after the talk. So, but yeah, I'm very grateful for so many people connecting, even beyond the Barcelona community. So thank you all for joining us for tonight. And thank you again, Jeff, for spending this time with us. Good night.
My pleasure.
Good night, everyone.